episode 242 of the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. We speak to coach and CEO Patrick Thean, and he's going to tell you how you can accelerate your team's growth. All about growing your team today, folks. Are you ready for this? All right, let's do it.
Welcome one, welcome all to the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast, a weekly podcast series dedicated to helping you hit peak performance across the three domains of leadership. Those being leading yourself, leading your team, and leading your organization. This podcast couples my 20 years of military experience as a senior Canadian Army officer with world-class guests to bring you the most complete podcast of leadership going. And for more, feel free to check out our website at movingforwardleadership.com. And with that, let's get to the show.
Yes, welcome one, welcome all. It is your Chief Leadership Officer, Scott McCarthy, and thanks for coming out to the show. It's so good to have you here. It's so great, to get behind the mic and just talk about something I'm passionate about every day, and that's leadership and inspiring others and leading others. And I'm recording this intro to this show right after one of our mastermind group calls, and I'm just pumped. It just gets me going. And you know what? I just love doing this work. It brings me alive. And thanks for coming and listening. Anyway, you're going to hear the listen to me get all gooey and mushy with you. You're here because you want to learn how to accelerate your team's growth. And that's exactly what we're talking about today. Today, we got Patrick Thean, and he is a author. He's got his own book referred to as Rhythm, How to Accelerate Breakthrough Execution and Accelerate Growth. And I will tell you, it is a great read. So you can go and grab yourself a copy, and it would not be money wasted. He's the CEO of his own company, and he is a coach, and he is all about helping you, leaders of teams, to essentially get them to break through those plateaus that they're having and achieve great execution and accelerate your growth in order to achieve new heights. And that's what we're talking about today. In fact, what we actually talk about how strong Mondays set him up for success. And we actually record this podcast episode on a Monday morning, so it was quite interesting. And then we talk about how we can set our team up to achieve peak performance, and how to prepare yourself for the upcoming week, and how we establish a culture of the gift of red, and then how to establish a stop doing list. And these are all interesting things that actually help you grow and not go backwards. And it's very interesting. We're in a society where more is better. Next thing, do more with less, constant. And we actually talk about doing less. And that's it. Doing less. So, that's today's show. So, if you're ready for it, ladies and gentlemen, sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with Patrick Thean, all about how to accelerate your team's growth.
Love it. Patrick, sir, welcome to the show. So good to have you here today.
Scott, good morning. Thank you.
So it's early Monday morning. I'm technically on my day off from work, but of course, this is my side hustle, so I'm working this. You're just saying your Mondays are strong. So let me pick at that for a second. When you say your Mondays are strong, what do you mean by that?
Sure. So on Mondays, I take the opportunity to meet with my team and to just kind of get everyone going off on a good rhythm. I believe that if you hit Monday well and you get everyone kind of highly energetic and focused on the week, then the rest of the week would be like rolling the rock downhill. But if you kind of get a slow start, then you're going to be salmon swimming upstream. So I much rather roll the rock downhill than salmon swimming upstream.
So let's dive tactically into this now. So that's the overall strategy there. Strong Monday, I really like the concept, setting the team up for success, like pushing a rock downhill, vice uphill for sure. So how do you actually go about doing that, getting everyone on the same page? What does that look like? Is that, face-to-face meeting? Are you guys going through calendar events, or you're setting priorities for the
So
week?
we have a weekly meeting. Now we call this a weekly adjustment meeting because most people have a weekly meeting that is status oriented, and I feel like status meetings are, one, boring, two, very expensive, because you got your executive team in a room. That's an expensive meeting, so I don't want to waste my time on providing status. So we call this a weekly adjustment meeting. Everyone provides their status ahead of time. Everyone then provides a very short week in sync note on what the week is going to be about. Everyone thinks hard about what their top few priorities for the week are. Then we jump into our weekly adjustment meeting. That's with my executive team, basically at about 9:30. So between 9 o'clock and 9:30, I go through some preparation for that. So I'm prepared for that. I feel like it's my job to make sure that the executive team is a very powerful weekly adjustment meeting to kind of kick off the week. So in that meeting, we will process the key priorities that we have for the quarter. And we've had pre-statused it, and we've read each other's insights on it, so we can dive right into solving any problems. Anything that's red or yellow, we'll tackle. And we'll do that till about 11 o'clock. The team has a short break, and then at about 11:30, the whole company gets on a team huddle for the week, and we kind of go around the room, and we have different agendas. But right now, the agenda is to share something that you're thankful about, and then to share your number one thing for the whole week. So that just gets everyone kind of focused, grateful, and ready to hit the week. That's my morning routine. And then in the afternoon, I meet with my a couple of my executives, and we have one-on-ones, and anything I can do to kind of get them strong. So right now, that time right after lunch goes to my head of products, and then we have a couple of, again, depending on what projects they have going on, I typically have a couple of project-oriented meetings on Monday. So everything I can to line up people that work with me on Mondays is what I try and do on my Mondays. So my philosophy is, if I take Monday and get everyone aligned and everyone kind of collaborating well together, then I really don't have to worry about how everyone's doing their work for the rest of the week, because we've all discussed what we're most focused on. We've gained clarity. Stephen Covey talks about keeping the end in mind, and I believe in not just, he says begin with the end in mind. I believe in beginning and keeping the end in mind. So every Monday, we kind of keep the end in mind for our goals for the quarter. And that's the rhythm that we use, and that's the rhythm that we teach our customers how to do as well.
I really like that whole concept. I really like the idea there of putting your status, like emailing in or messaging it ahead of time, because you're right. It's super expensive. And at work, we do the same thing. We sit in and provide status updates. And there's about 13 of us around the table. And it's a lot of money tied up for that couple hours to just status reports. But I really like what you do. So you basically, message the status ahead of time, and anybody can read it. And then, you focus on, take that meeting and focus it into something really, what's going to move the yardsticks. Statuses don't move the yardsticks. It's what you said. It's the adjustments that make the yardsticks move. So right. I really like that. I was actually, as you were discussing it, I was kind of reflecting on how I might incorporate that idea, that concept more so into my team and our weekly updates that I run, so that I can get the best bang for the buck out of my crew, and they're not wasting their time per se. Because to me, I hate having my time wasted, but I even hate more wasting other people's time and just simply, hey, this is what we got going on. This is what we've been doing. Yeah. To me, it's kind of, it's important, but at the same time, it's also a waste of time. And I'm sure you understand what I mean by that.
Yeah, I think most of us don't realize this. I think the other way to look at it instead of wasting time is that I could think of it also as a very expensive meeting, because you've got your executive team there. So that's really a very expensive meeting, and you have a choice on how you choose to use that time. But when you start thinking of it as a very expensive meeting, how would you like to deploy that investment? I think for me anyway, my brain kind of kicks into a different place versus feeling like I'm wasting time. Because there's so many things I know I'm wasting time on that I kind of kick myself later and go, oh, Patrick, I can't believe you did that. It was a waste of time. But somehow the idea that I'm about to deploy, a slice of, all these expensive salaries for an hour every single week, that's a pretty big investment. So I think lots of times we forget about the investments that we've made that were made ahead of time, like payroll. You don't have to worry about writing payroll checks anymore because that's automatically done for you. And I think that, unfortunately, the good part of or the bad part of automation, unfortunately, is that you don't see it, right? So if you don't see it, you don't have the pain anymore. But imagine if you were writing a paycheck every month or every week, you'd feel the pain of that paycheck. You'd feel like, oh, I'm paying so and so this much money. Did he or she do the right thing this week? And then your podcast is about peak performance. So I think that it's my job as the head of this company to make sure that everyone achieves their peak performance. So for me, I believe that first I got to set the environment right, because that's the only thing I can do really. I can set the environment right, and as a leader, the biggest weapon I have is actually the words I've said. So how do I use my words to have everyone, find this environment a grateful one, a joyful one, and a place that they can be inspired to be at their peak performance. So that's what my Monday is about. My Monday is about trying to get everyone into that space where they're going to have a great week. By the way, the only way to have a great year is to have 4 great quarters. The only way to have a great quarter is to have 13 great weeks. So, my book talks about having this weekly adjustment meeting. It talks about getting yourself ready for it. We call that a meeting with yourself, your meeting with yourself. And so you kind of meet with yourself, reflect on the week, think about what you're going to be doing this coming week. If you prepare yourself well, there's a good chance you will then collaborate well with your friends. If you don't prepare yourself well, you probably will come in a little guilty, a little apprehensive, and a little defensive. When somebody asks you a question that you don't quite know the answer to, I've noticed that there's a difference. If I've prepared myself, somebody asks me a question that I don't know the answer to, I'm pretty okay, right? Hey, Scott, I'm sorry. I don't know the answer to the question. Let me go think about it a little bit because I prepared myself. But if I haven't prepared myself and somebody asks me a question that's challenging, I might feel defensive. I might feel like, why are you asking me that? Are you picking on me? Did I not do a good enough job for you? And really, it's because you're not ready. So you got your armor up. But if you're ready, you can kind of chill a little bit and know that you've done everything you can do. And if you don't know the answer, then it's really better for the team to just share that. You know what? I don't know the answer. Maybe somebody else does. But you won't feel the defensiveness, in my experience anyway, if you are well prepared.
No, I really like that. I really enjoyed the last bit there, talking about whether or not if you know the answer and how well prepared you are. The thing is, I've always said, people ask me questions that I don't know the answer to. I'm like, great, that's a great question. I actually don't know the answer to it, but let me get back to you. Or, and just like you said, anyone in the room have any insights? Because, I'm a smart cat, I like to think, but at the same time, I know I'm smart because I realize I don't know everything. In fact, I believe I know nothing. Therefore, I keep looking for more. So that's kind of how I kind of view it. You mentioned about preparing yourself for an upcoming week, and I thought that was great, and preparing for your upcoming week meeting. So how do you actually go about doing that? What does that look like for you? And what advice do you have to leaders out there who are like literally today preparing their Monday morning? As we do this interview, what's your best advice for them to go through this process?
So I like to do that either on a Friday or a Saturday. And because at the end of the week, it's freshest in your brain for you to look back and say, how did I do this week? So my meeting with yourself process starts with first reflecting on what you achieved this week. You look at your priorities that you set. Did you or did you not get what you wanted to do? And if you did it, then what do you learn from that? If you didn't achieve it, then what do you have to keep in mind for next week? And also, what can you learn from that? So that's the first step. The second step is I then look at my calendar for next week. I look at my goals for the quarter, and I decide what I'm going to do the following week. And I calendar it into my calendar. So I believe you got to live your calendar. So Sometimes people think, oh, I'm going to do this, and the other. But the calendar didn't have space to do this, and the other. So if the calendar did not have the space to do that work, they've already kind of failed before they even started the week. So you want to make sure that your calendar has the space to do the work that you want to do. Then we use our own software Rhythm. So we go into Rhythm, and then I provide a red, yellow, or green status on the KPIs and the priorities that I have. We then do the week in sync notes, which we write down, okay, based on that, what's my top priorities for the following week. Now, in my case, being the guy that owns the weekly adjustment meeting for my executive team, I come back on during the weekend, or I may get it done that Friday also, where I put down the agenda for this meeting. Everyone can then see the agenda for this meeting. I usually pick one or two special topics we're going to discuss based on reading my team's status and priorities, and what's the theme for the quarter. I tend to pick one or two discussions that we're going to have what I call a spicy discussion, something that is one of those discussions that you got to have. If you have it, it'll help you grease the skids and you'll have a better quarter. And those are the difficult ones. Those are the discussions that a lot of people in the room would rather just kind of leave it alone for another week. Well, if you leave it alone for another week, that's one less week you have to solve that problem. So that's kind of my process of getting ready. Then on Monday morning before the meeting starts, I'll jump in again and I'll kind of read everyone's week in sync notes so that I can, and I encourage my whole team to do that. So we've actually read each other's statuses. If you haven't read your team statuses, you can't do what I'm about to suggest, right? Because you'd come in wanting to know the status, but we've now read everyone's status. We've read each other's week in sync notes. And when we come together, we can just highly engage on the most important things. One last note I'll say is that I have this concept I call the gift of red. So when you've status something red, that means it's in trouble. And I encourage people that have something that is about to be in trouble to status it red, because the earlier you provide a red status, the more time the team has to figure out as a team how to get past that. So we're all human, so none of us like to status something red. None of us like to say, hey, I'm in trouble over here. We would much rather think that while that's a little bit in danger, I can pull it out, man. I can get it done. It's going to be fine. You can depend on me. But that's really the ego speaking. I think that for the good of the team, I would much rather people say, hey, you know what, this project, I think I can pull it out, but right now it's red. And I welcome anybody who has a thought or a helpful voice for that. So I call that the gift of red, because it's human nature when somebody provides a poor result or poor status to get annoyed and to maybe even want to beat up the messenger. That's just human instinct. And I think that, as a leader, you got to set the culture of your company such that people are allowed and able and feel comfortable to share what's not working. If you do that, then you get what I call the gift of red. You get early warning that something's not going to work well, and then you have more time to actually solve that. So I hunt for the reds before my weekly meeting, and then I seek out the gift of red. And then the first thing I try and say, I'm only human, so I don't always get it right, but the first thing I try to say is thank you for providing that. And then let's just dive into it and try very, very hard not to blame the messenger for that red. Because once you do that, people are going to be afraid to share something that's not working, and then people will wait until they can solve it. And then if they can't solve it, they'll share it. But guess what? You've probably lost 3 or 4 weeks of early warning to help and resolve that.
I love that whole the gift of red concept. I think that is fantastic. Basically boils down to psychological safety within your organization. And as well, I enjoyed what you're talking about. You're losing weeks of time to not solve the problem if you don't have that culture already. But as well, if you shoot the messenger, then you're potentially delaying other reds from popping up as well, because the other team members around the table see you shooting the messenger. Like, oh, I think I'm yellow right now, but I'm definitely not going to say I'm red next week if it is actually. It doesn't get better because
right.
My friend Tim there just got shot in front of everyone. So, but you said something interesting, and I'd like to dive more personally into it, and that is, it's up to the leader to establish the culture of the organization to allow it. So as the owner of your business and leader of your business, how do you go about doing that? Especially if you bring someone new into the team, how do you go about actually establishing that culture that enables people to bring problems forward without fear of reprise, without fear of being shot as the messenger, so that they can bring these problems forth and you guys can solve it together as a team?
Well, most companies have core values, right? And I still remember 20 some years ago, 30 years ago, when I started my career, which has spanned, unfortunately, many decades now. I remember walking to a customer's conference room, and this is when, this is in the, I would say this is in the early 90s, when not every company had core values yet. And this company had beautiful core values that they were on the wall. And I complimented them to my customer. I said, hey, this is wonderful. I said, your values written on the wall are so beautiful. I almost want to cry. I want to work here. And my customer surprised me. She said, whatever, it's just marketing. It looks good, but nobody really does that. That really broke my heart. And for a long time, I didn't give much credence to core values. In fact, I thought that they were just nonsense that was written on the wall because no one does it anyway. But I learned through the years that actually that company may have done it wrong. And what I'd done, I should have learned, not, they call this a stupid, but I should have learned that company did it wrong. Core values are good. You need to live them well. So I would suggest, first of all, that your value system is really the basis that creates the right mindsets for your culture. So one of our core values is no TDC, no thinly disguised contempt, which actually means that you need to clear the air. That's one. The second core value we have is be appreciative. Another one that we have is go the second mile. Go anticipate the needs of your colleagues and your customers and give them what they need, not what they ask for. So go the second mile. So somewhere within those three core values should create the behavior that says, hey, you know what? When somebody is in trouble, I need to go the second mile. Or if I'm unhappy with you, I need to kind of clear that up. That's the no disguised contempt value. So the values are written. Now it's really up to everyone in the company. Unfortunately, I am the lead dog, right? So unfortunately, that means that I have to model that behavior first. And again, I'm not perfect. No one's perfect. So the days when I model that behavior incorrectly, and those are bad days, and those are days I got to kind of work hard to erase. And I often feel like it takes 10 great acts to erase one bad act. So I would say that a lot of people understand this gift of red and understand inherently not to beat up the messenger, but you've got to create the culture. So it starts with you. It starts with whether or not you are demonstrating that it's okay. It's a fine line you walk because you want to invite the difficult conversation, and at the same time, you've got to find a way to hold that person accountable to results as well. So the gift of red doesn't necessarily mean that you have a carte blanche to not execute and not be accountable. Those are two different things. But I do think that you got to have both concepts in your head. You got to be able to say, you know what, the gift of red, does my culture allow that? Does my environment allow that? Have I modeled that behavior that says, hey, Scott, it's okay. We'll deal with the consequences later or whatever later, but let's work to solve this together. I want you to be successful. Let's work to solve this together. And then at the same time, I think you got to have enough courage later to say, look, Scott, that didn't go very well. I get it. But let's talk about it, right? Let's talk about why didn't that go very well? Because I'm curious. I'm curious to know, what we could have done a little bit better. Maybe you took on too much. Maybe you didn't have the right tools. Maybe you didn't have the right training. It really doesn't matter how we got here. What matters is I just paid for tuition. And I want to make sure that you learn from that tuition. And hopefully I only pay for tuition once. So you gotta do both. You gotta be able to say, hey, it's okay, relax, chill, it's good. Share early the issues. And then I think that the second part is I think that you've got to have accountability so that everyone learns and gets better as a team, as a company, so that that tuition dollars you just spent is well invested, and everyone understands that that was tuition spent. But it's okay, because I like to say to my team, you're on my team until you're not on my team. So I'm pretty binary about that. Now, not everyone believes that, especially new employees. New employees don't believe that because they come from cultures that are very different. So I think when someone enters your company, you asked this question earlier, and it was a very good question. So when a new employee comes in, how do we do some of these things? Is you got to help them see the environment. So when a new employee comes in, they'll hear me say things like, "Hey, I can't wait for you to make your first mistake." I've had people say to me, "Wow, that's a very strange thing to hear from my CEO." And I said to them, I said, "Well, you think about it. You are going to make a mistake, because if you don't make any mistakes, that means you're not pushing the boundaries enough. You're staying safe. You have more you can give me. So I can't wait to see your first mistake." And then I share with them how this environment is a risk-taking environment. So if you take risk, what does that mean? Clearly, I expect you to make a mistake. I can't say, "Scott, I want to see you take risk, make good decisions, take some risks. But dude, you better not screw up." Well, that I'm going to not take any risk then, right? If you say to me, "You better not screw up," well, no. So I like to tell people, look, I expect you to make some mistakes. In fact, if you're not making enough mistakes, then probably something's not right here. You're not pushing hard enough. You're not testing the boundaries. You're not experimenting. You're not trying things. So that's kind of the thinking that I have about bringing an employee in. They got to see, and then they got to understand, because words only give you a surface understanding. Your eyes let you see a deeper understanding, and then your actions confirm that you have understanding. So it's a process. It's not like instant.
It's definitely not a one and done thing, right? It
Oh
takes
yeah,
time. It takes a lot of effort, and it's daily. And it's one of those things that you said it, and you can't forget it once you get there, because, as you said, one mistake by you, and it takes 10 more acts of good to kind of not erase it, but rather regain from it, per se. I liked what you talked about earlier about looking at a problem, mistake or whatever, and not focusing on the individual, but rather that problem, that mistake at the time, and then later revisiting it. I talk about this a lot. In fact, I run a mastermind community, the Leader Growth Mastermind. We meet weekly, and I have curated content for them and all this stuff. We were having this conversation with one of the members. One of their people had made a mistake, and they were trying to figure out the best way to go through it. And I said, "Listen, 90% of problems out there are systems problems." And you've probably seen the triangle, right, of problems. It starts at cultures, goes to systems, goes to habits, rituals, and then it goes to individual. 90% of the problems out there, mistakes that occur out there, is due to some kind of systematic failure. So look at that first before we start blaming it. But then as we fix it, we talk about the process that you kind of outlined, and I have a very similar thing. We call it the after action review. Okay, what went right? What went wrong? What can we do better next time? How can we mitigate what happened this time, in the future? And we look at it very systematically, and generally people are very responsive, very receptive to that type of, approach, because it's not like, "You, Patrick, you screwed up. You're the reason why this failed, blah, 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 blah." But rather you look like, okay, what was the systematic error behind the scenes that we may not see every day that potentially caused this? Was it, you weren't properly trained? Was it you weren't properly given guidance? Was it were you not the proper tools? Was not enough time? Whatever. And we look at it from that approach first, and that enables the person to actually get into a more relaxed space, and then they will provide more. Vice what you said earlier in the podcast of, you get defensive, and that happens on both sides of the coin, right? When you're asked a question you don't know and you get defensive, well, if they don't know, or they feel like you could be, after their head, per se, because of this error or mistake, they'll get defensive too, and they'll start looking to blame other things, vice going, this was wrong, blah, blah, blah. Maybe I could have did this better here. And now we're in the growth zone. And that's what we want, because tie into something else you said earlier, which is, meetings are expensive, especially with senior leaders. Well, freaking hiring is expensive too. We don't want to be firing people and hiring all the time, or having people quit
because that process is equally, if not more expensive. So I really enjoyed that whole segment there.
Oh, thank you.
So, we're talking about teams. We're talking about rhythms, and we've talked about meetings. We've talked about a lot of different stuff in here. And I'm skimming through your book, and there's a couple of things that that kind of popped out at me, Patrick. I want to dive in a little bit deeper. And one of those was your stop doing list, which is like, yes, I really like this concept, right? The stop doing list. So can we dive into that one a little bit deeper, and like, how does the leader out there, go into a stop doing list? And actually, I'll back it up. So here at the podcast, we're about peak performance, but we're about peak performance across what I call my 3 domains, and that is myself, my team, and my organization. So how can we, dive into a stop doing list across those 3 domains for the leaders out there?
Yeah, I think that, as a company grows, what happens is that we outgrow different processes and different things that we have in the company. So we do a start, stop, keep, right? What are some ideas that you want to start doing? What are some ideas that have no longer worthy of time and energy? Maybe your company's outgrown them, or maybe we're done, and we call what do you stop doing? And then finally, what's working really well that you want to kind of double down on, and those are keeps. Now the challenge is usually that we have a lot more starts, lots more ideas, and we don't have a lot of stops. So I encourage everyone to realize that in order to start new projects, you actually have to finish old ones, or if you have to stop some old ones because you need to make space for new things. So whatever you said yes to in the start, you've also said no to in considering new ideas. So I would say that in our quarterly planning, we have a rhythm for you to provide a start, stop, keep, and we encourage people to do that at the company level, at your team level, and also on your personal level. And from that place, you will be able to gather a list of stops. Now, you get all kinds of stuff in the list of stops. Not everything in the list of stops is worthy of stopping. And oftentimes I find that people make the mistake of providing a stop, but it's really what I call a start in disguise. Let's stop doing this, but I want us to do this instead. So that to me is really a start in disguise, or something's not really working very well. So I'd like us to stop this report, but I want us to create this other report. So that's a start in disguise. I really try and look for things that can de-hassle the company, things that you really want to stop and not replace that with anything. Those to me are golden, because that actually frees up energy versus a stop that is in disguise of a start. Didn't free up any energy. All you did was a swap out. Stop doing this and do that. You just did a swap out. And in fact, it's very hard to think that way. So it takes a few rounds of doing this for people to really recognize that these are starts, these are stops, these are keeps. And then oftentimes when I walk into a new company, a new client, they'll have a lot of reports and a lot of things that they're doing, and I'll ask them, who reads these reports? Reports is an easy target for me, so I'll just use an easy target. Okay, so who reads these reports, and can we stop them? And lots of times, if the company is rather been around 10, 20, 30 years, sometimes we have reports that date back 15, 20 years ago, and my client can't tell me who actually used that report. I say, well, why don't you just stop producing it? They say, well, because someone may need it, and I'm scared to stop it because I don't know what I'm going to break. So here's where I like to live a little dangerously, and my clients know that. When they hire me and my team, we live a little bit on the edge, and I say the best way to figure that out without wasting a lot of energy to go find out who the heck needs this report is just to stop. And if no one runs to your office and says, Scott, where the heck is this report that I need every Monday? Well, okay, you need it. Great. I'm sorry I stopped it. I'll just restart it tomorrow. You get it tomorrow. But instead of spending a lot of time doing analysis, I just stop these reports. And then if no one comes and bugs you about it, it's going to be fine. I had a client once that I asked them to work on their key performance indicators, and he said, Patrick, you'd be very proud of me. KPIs, I got them, man. I got them in style. And he gives me a book of, literally a lot of key performance indicators. And I asked him, I said, hey, tell me of this whole deck here, what is the top three that you really care about? He couldn't answer that question. So what are the top three you really care about? He said, they're all important. I said, no, then which ones do you look at, right? The truth is, if they're all important, that means you don't have the time to look at them. That means you don't look at any of them. So we had that whole discussion. He goes, well, I said, do you realize how much energy goes into your company to create this stack of KPIs for yourself and for your teams? He goes, well, lots of people need them. I said, okay, who needs them? Which guys and gals need them? Like, who needs them? And again, well, we've been doing this for years. I said, okay, well, he said, what do you think we should do? I said, I think you should just stop them. Stop them and come up with which are your top 10 KPIs. And but people depend on it. I go, great. Those people depend on it. When they find out you've stopped it, they'll come tell you. So he made an announcement. He took the challenge. He made an announcement to the team. He said, guys, I'm going to stop this book of KPIs. And if anyone needs it, come tell me the ones you want, and I won't stop those. Well, very few people came. Almost no one came to tell him which KPIs they wanted. The CEO came and said, these are the few that I want. That's it. Nobody else came and told him the KPIs they wanted. So he took a deep breath and he tore up the book. And then different people, they come out the woodwork after that and say, well, wait a minute. What about this inventory KPI I used to get? All right, fine. We'll put it back in. And he ended back up with a very thin set of KPIs, really, really thin, just a handful from each department. And that's where you want to be, because you don't want to measure everything that moves. You only want to measure the things that matter. And the things that matter, unfortunately, change. So what happens as a company grows is that this matters right now, so we measure it. We've moved on to a different place. This over here now matters. That's fine. So you measure this and you measure that. Then we move on to a different place. And now every place you go, you pick up some key performance indicators that you want to measure. But most of us don't turn around and stop the ones that we were measuring and ask ourselves, do we still need to do this? So over time, it's very easy to just collect a lot of work that nobody really cares about. But everyone's afraid to question, because at some point in time, something broke when we didn't have these. Okay, so let's figure out if life has changed enough. I mean, something's got automated, so you don't need these things anymore. Life has changed. And I think that sometimes, by the way, this is also similar to a company who is very good in process. I'm not digging process. I believe in process too. We have a lot of processes at my company. But I think that most of us leaders need to not be dualistic thinkers. We need to train ourselves not to go, well, it's either A or B, but really ask yourself, how possibly could it be maybe A and B? Like the power of the A and D, I like to call that, is something that maybe opens our mind to that third alternative. But I think too often we're thinking, well, to do this, we got to stop that. To do that, we got to stop this. So that's what I mean by dualistic thinking. And instead, maybe we can figure out how to see the value. There's probably a little bit of value in this item and a little bit of value in this item. So when I say A and B, I don't mean take the full A and the full B. I mean slowing down enough to figure out what are the little bits of value in A that you can extract, what are the little bits of value in B that you can extract, and maybe that then combines and creates the third option for yourself that you didn't see before.
No, I really like that. There's a lot of things I can relate to, especially the just stop writing the report. I did that in my current job when I took over. There was a report that was getting generated every week, and I looked at it, I'm like, I don't care. And they were like, yes, but your predecessor wanted it. I'm like, why? They're like, And I was like, well, it wasn't obviously that important when he handed his job off to me that he didn't even mention about it, really. So I'm like, all right. They're like, well, other people read it. I'm like, okay. Who? I'm like, I don't know either. So yeah, I stopped it, and it like freed up the team. And all of a sudden they're like, this is great. I'm like, okay. They're like, but they came back to like, well, there's parts of it that are good for us internally. I'm like, cool. It's yours. You do with it what you need internally. It has nothing to do with me, and I don't really care about it or need it. And lo and behold, not a single person came to my door and complained that this report was no longer being done to the same level or anything as it was as it has been in the past. So yes, for you leaders out there, and you're wondering about what's going on with those TPS reports and where do they go after they get handed from Bob to so and so. Well, just stop feeding Bob and see what happens. Because I guarantee you, I bet there will be a lot less impact than what you think. So it's awesome. Patrick, this has been a great conversation. And we've literally only hit little skims of tops of various parts you have in your book, Rhythm. Before I'll give you an opportunity to talk about you and your team, but we're going to slowly wrap up here. And I got a couple last questions for you. The first being a question I asked all the guests here at the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. And that is according to you, Patrick Thean. What makes a great leader?
So I don't really know what makes a great leader. I focus on helping leaders achieve breakthroughs to their teams to achieve their dreams. So I'll share with you the things I look for that what I call contribute to execution leadership. Okay, so I would first begin with emotional intelligence, and that's from Daniel Goleman. So that's not from me, but he talks about emotional intelligence having 5 key things: self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skill. Social skill meaning that you can guide people to do the things that they need to do. So that's what social skill means. Not about drinking wine and enjoying each other's company. Sometimes when I don't explain social skill, people think, oh, I need to be able to go out and hold a party. I'm like, no. That's not what social skill means in this context. And then I've got another 5 or 6 items that I really care about that help you with great execution. One is candor. I think a leader who's leading his team or her team in execution needs to be able to be candid. Needs to be able to share things that are working, things that are not working. Needs to have the courage to be candid. The next thing is to be curious. So you got to have enough curiosity in you to ask about what went wrong, what's red, versus. So if your curiosity outweighs your blaming factor in your mind, that's kind of part of my DNA. Is I'm very curious, and I'm a little bit playful too. So I'm very curious, and I want to know why and how and what. And I'm much more interested to understand something than to figure out who screwed up. So be very curious, and then I think a leader's job is to coach, not scold. So you want to coach and help people understand how they can learn to collaborate with others as well. You got to own it. There's a owning mentality versus a victim mentality, right? Victim mentality is, well, wait a minute, that wasn't my fault, right? Owning mentality is, okay, I got it, happened under my watch. And in your brain, you'll be screaming, that's not my fault, but it's okay. You say, I own it. Let's figure that out. And then I think that praising and correcting needs to happen very quickly. That's hard to do. Praising is easier than correcting, but both need to happen very quickly. And then the last one I would have is the difference between delegation and abdication. So a lot of leaders think that they're delegating, but they're not. They're really abdicating, going, hey, Scott, go ahead, take this project. I've delegated to you. And when you're done, wrap it up in a nice bow and bring it back to me. That's abdication. That's sending somebody on a journey without being present, without being helpful, without coaching, and without being curious. So delegation to me also has an element of accountability, where you want to have that person be accountable to results along the way so that person will succeed. Because if you just send that person off on a journey of abdication, and that person comes back a month later and says, hey, Patrick, look, I've finished. And you look at it, you go, whoa, that's not what I expected. Well, whose fault is that now? Right? You're now in a tough position. And you've wasted a month. So I think a lot of people don't know the difference between delegation with accountability attached and abdication. So that's kind of what I look for when I think of leadership from an execution, getting things done perspective.
Hey, that's great. I appreciate that very much. And a final question of the show: how can people find you, follow you, grab a copy of the book? It's all about you now.
Great, thank you. Well, you can follow me on rhythmsystems.com is my website, and my email is patrick@rhythmsystems.com. So I think I'm also on LinkedIn and the usual places.
That's awesome. And for the listeners, always, it's easy for you. Just go to lead.don't boss /242, and the links are in the show notes. Patrick and Sir, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know Mondays are rough for you, so I greatly appreciate you were able to sneak us in here because it was definitely worth it.
Thank you. I enjoy myself, and Mondays are very enjoyable for me, actually. So thank you for being part of my Monday.
And that's a wrap for this episode, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. But you know what you could do to truly support the podcast? And no, that's not leaving a rating and review. It's simply helping a friend. And that is helping a friend by sharing this episode with them if you think this would resonate with them and help them elevate their performance level, whether that's within themselves, their teams, or their organization. So do that, help me, help a friend, win-win all around, and hey, you look like a great friend at the same time. So just hit that little share button on your app, and then feel free to fire this episode to anyone that you feel would benefit from it. Finally, there's always more. There's always more lessons around being the highest performing leader that you can possibly be, whether that's for yourself, your team, or your organization. So why don't you subscribe? Subscribe to the show via movingforwardleadership.com/subscribe. And until next time, lead, don't boss, and thanks for coming out. Take care now.